All right, Corey Wolters, fantasy football guru for the Attack the Rack YouTube channel. Let's start with quarterbacks. How are you feeling about quarterbacks this season?
Good, man. I think there's a lot of depth in quarterback. And again, I do want to reiterate, I am no fantasy expert here. And so like you can take the information I give you and take what you want with it, but don't like don't be hating me if I get these wrong. I'm no expert here.
We won't put out your social media channels for people to contact you. Don't worry.
I appreciate it. Um, yeah, no quarterbacks. What I have here is a tier-based system instead of like a top 10 ranking. I think the tier-based helps, it closes gaps, and I think it shows you where there's a drop-off at different positions throughout your draft, and I think that can be very helpful. And so, like, if you have, two or three quarterbacks in a certain tier, and you want to get one of those quarterbacks, but then you see that there's a larger number of wide receivers in a different tier, you might go with a quarterback because chances of you not getting that tiered quarterback that you want won't be there at your next pick when a tier of that wide receiver may still be there.
Sure.
So what I have today, I hope that made sense.
Yeah.
But what I had today is I just kind of went based on some tiers that I have. And then in that first tier, sometimes there could be one player, there could be four players, it could be two players. It changes and that varies. So this is no particular ranking order or system or anything like that. It's just these are my tier one quarterbacks that I have.
Sure.
For me, in the first tier is Patrick Mahomes. I think last year was one of his worst years outside of his rookie year, which he hardly played. But last year he struggled with a lot of drop balls from his receivers. I think that whole wide receiver core is a little bit revamped. I think he's going to have a pretty big bounce back year. Adding Hollywood Brown, they get Xavier Worthy in the draft. And then you have the second year player in Rashee Rice, who I think is going to be really good as well. And then not to mention his favorite target in Travis Kelce. So I think Patrick Mahomes has a big bounce back year, and he's in that tier one of quarterbacks. Another quarterback in that tier is Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is a dual threat quarterback. He's going to get a ton of tush push touchdowns this year. I think he had around 15 of them just last year. And so that just literally bumps him, into another tier with his dual threat. He is extremely good throwing the ball. He's extremely good running the ball. And he has two really good elite wide receivers that he can throw to. And then with the addition of Saquon Barkley too, I think that really helps out Jalen Hurts as well. And then the last guy I have in the tier is Josh Allen. Josh Allen did lose two of his starting wide receivers. However, his ability to run as a dual threat, he had 15 rushing touchdowns and he throws for over 4,500 yards. And so those guys essentially are your top three quarterbacks. If you're looking for quarterback early on, those are the guys that you want to target.
All right, sure.
Going now to tier two, I have four quarterbacks in my tier two. None of these are in particular order again, but I'll go ahead and start with Lamar Jackson. Lamar does not throw for the high number of yards as the other quarterbacks in tier one, which is why I have him in here tier two. However, his rushing ability is elite, and that gets him potential to jump into that tier one range. Adding Derrick Henry this year, I think is only going to help him out as well. And so Lamar has potential to jump into tier one. I just don't think he throws enough to get himself into that tier one category.
Sure.
Next would be Dak Prescott. Dak tossed for over 4,500 yards last year with 36 touchdowns. And he's got CeeDee Lamb in his prime. I think those two guys are going to dominate in 2024.
Okay.
Next would be CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud is loaded with weapons. He has, with Diggs coming on board and mixing at the running back spot, followed up with Nico Collins and Tank Dell. I think CJ Stroud is just surrounded by talent. And so he will throw for a ton of yards and a ton of touchdowns, but he doesn't have the massive upside of the running. So I just don't know if he'll break into that tier one, but
Okay.
he has to pass for a lot of yards to make sure he stays in that tier two range. The last guy I have in that tier two range is Joe Burrow. When healthy, he's just a stud with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. He also has a little bit of running potential in him, but I think Joe's going to have a really good bounce back year from his being healthy from his injury last year.
Yeah, they in my opinion, hearing your tiers, there's not a huge gap there, I don't believe, between tier one and tier two. Like you mentioned, if Lamar can get some passing yardage up, he could very well be on the verge of that tier one. CJ Stroud, in the league I was in last year, I was fortunate enough to draft or pick him up late. Just I needed a quarterback just in case, and he ended
Yeah,
up being my leading scorer last year. And
yeah,
like you said, incredible amount of weapons. One thing that makes me nervous about him, it's probably a cliche, but the sophomore slump possibility.
sure.
But he's another one that potentially, like you said, right on that borderline maybe of your tier one. And then Joe Burrow, if he comes back healthy, he also could be kind of in that mix. So doesn't see doesn't seem a huge gap between a lot of those tier one and tier two guys.
No, I don't think so. I think Lamar could get into tier one. I just don't know if the other three could.
Sure.
Um, it just because of Lamar's rushing ability is just elite, and so he could bounce into that tier one. I just think that those top four then are, hands down a little bit better than the rest of the field. But I don't have Lamar in that tier one because he just doesn't throw for as
Sure.
many air yards or as touchdowns as the other guys do.
Absolutely. Yep. And then you got tier three yet?
Yeah, I got tier three. I only got two quarterbacks in my tier three. This next guy was a little bit hard for me because I think he also has potential to go into tier one. Um, but he didn't give a great sample size last year after being hurt right away in the season, and that's Anthony Richardson.
Sure.
I think he has a massive upside with that running ability. I just don't know if he can throw the ball as well as others can, but he's also got some really good weapons. He's got a great running back around him. They got a good offensive line. So I could see Anthony Richardson bumping into that tier two range by the time the season's done. Could he jump into the tier one? Possibly. But this one was hard for me to rank, but his upside to me is what gets him into tier three.
Okay.
And then the other guy I have is Kyler Murray. Coming off a second year out of injury. He's got a good number one receiver in Marvin Harrison now, and then he also has a really good tight end. Kyler's one of those dual threat quarterbacks, and so those guys they get you so many more points, and so those are guys that you want to look to target. In the mids of your draft with Anthony Richardson and Kyler Murray with great upside potential.
Couple guys that are kind of a little bit maybe easy to forget about too, with Richardson getting hurt last year and Kyler Murray um, you know, kind of having a down season, some injuries, things like that.
Yeah, it's always funny doing drafts. I mean, the earlier you do drafts, the more these guys are down the board, and then you start to see drafts come around more frequently this time of year. Then those guys are always creeping back up there too.
Sure.
And you got, like I said, you got to know your league. Like our quarterbacks going early in the draft, that's a potential for you to get value at other picks. And then if quarterbacks are going later, it's a value opportunity for you to get value at the quarterback position too. So you got to know your league and your draft mates and the guys around you as well.
All right. Hey, any incoming rookies that could possibly have somewhat of an impact? Maybe a JJ McCarthy if he ends up as the starter. A lot of obviously, Caleb Williams is projected to be the starter. Not really any well, New England, who are they going to start?
Uh, right now, from what I hear, it's going to be Jacoby Brissett, but it's early on.
But
Yeah, I mean,
potentially an injury to Brissett or not playing well, maybe Drake May could step in. Any of these guys even worth um, drafting late, or more so maybe, hey, if they end up starting and end up having some success, you can always pick them up later.
yeah, I think there's two of them, and they're going to be drafted. That's Caleb Williams and uh, I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, and I shouldn't be. Washington, number two pick overall.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, Help me out, Jaden Daniels.
Yes, Jaden Daniels. Yes. Okay.
Um, and so I think both of those guys are semi dual threats. They're rookies. Caleb Williams has, a lot around him, and so there's a good chance that he'd be pretty successful. But um, it's all about building and development. And if they're able to do that, I think can be successful. But if they're rushed into it, you can see some uh dramatic downfalls
Yeah,
come up in those spots in the rookie position.
absolutely. Seen it many times. How about any diamonds in the rough? Any sleepers maybe that
Uh, Now that is to be yet to be determined.
yeah. I mean, I don't want to say, is there a CJ Stroud this year? Because nobody could have predicted
Yeah.
what CJ Stroud did last year.
No, there's a handful of quarterbacks later on. Jordan Love's really good. Jared Goff. The thing about Jared Goff is he doesn't do well in outdoor games. But the
Uh,
thing about Jared Goff this year, he only has 3 outdoor games. And
oh,
so
okay.
he could be, a guy that you want to pick up later. Justin Herbert lost some targets, but he's a really good talent. And so there's going to be guys throughout the whole draft. If you don't hit those top tier guys, you can always find value in the quarterback position later on in the draft.
And
Don't panic.
and then Herbert got a phenomenal head coach now.
Oh yeah, the best.
All right. All right. So that'll wrap up quarterbacks.